ultimately we're selling something, even internally. You're selling your marketing strategy, your vision, your creative strategy. If we don't sell that in the right way and speak to people in the right way and come to them where they are, even internally, which we know so much about doing externally, then we're sort of failing at the first hurdle.
Are you a fitness-loving foodie? Then Defy Snacks is for you. Defy offers real, high-quality chocolate you love, combined with functional ingredients, giving you as much as 26 grams of protein per bag, so you can be both a little bit bad and a little bit good at the same time. As a female-owned brand, Defy dedicates a portion of its profits to other women-owned businesses. Currently sold in the US, you can find us on snacks.com and follow us on social at Defy Snacks.
Hello and welcome to the Shiny New Object podcast. My name is Tom Ollerton. I'm the founder of Automated Creative, the creative effectiveness ad tech platform. And this is a weekly podcast about the future of data-driven marketing. And it's always my pleasure, always my privilege to interview one of our industry's leaders. And today is no different, but I'm doing it in person. I don't do this in person enough, but Chris insisted. I'm here with Chris Love, who is Head of Marketing Performance and Econometrics at Virgin Media O2. So Chris, for anyone who doesn't know who you are and what you do, could you give us a bit of background?
Thank you. And thank you for having me. I'm quite excited to be here. So I started my life at University of Nottingham. I did a degree in economics with French. I went up to live in Manchester and worked for various media agencies up there as part of the Dentsu Aegis group and did econometric modelling, mostly for retail clients. Then I moved down to London, worked at the Seven Stars media agency, again, different range of clients, supermarkets, bookies, the whole kind of lot. And then shortly after that, I worked at a company called AKA, which is another media agency, but it's more travel, tourism and that kind of thing. And then I joined Virgin Media back in 2020. So I like to consider myself a COVID baby because I joined when you couldn't go into the office and, you know, I had 1 hour with IT in my first week and then didn't see anybody else in person for like 4 months or something like that. And then, we merged with O2 in 2021. And that's when my role broadened out to cover Virgin Media and O2. And what I do is cover pretty much the effectiveness program. So all of our measurement outside of digital attribution and insight and research. So everything from experiments to econometrics to our reporting program, TV attribution, all that kind of stuff sits within my remit.
Right. That is serious creds, Chris. So what I'm curious to know is, to get to that point, you must have made some mistakes, but what is that massive screw up that you were really red-faced about at the time, but actually you're glad it happened in retrospect?
I think every analyst has an example of this in their time, if we're all truthful with ourselves. But back when I was working up in Manchester, and I really hope my bosses from that time don't hear this, or maybe they will like it. But I was working on a project for a client. We were about 2 days out from a debrief, quite a big debrief. We only did them once a year, and I realised that I had mixed up 2 columns or fields, depending on what term you like, in some of the data that I had input into these models that we had built. And I told my boss at the time, and we corrected it, and it completely changed the whole narrative. So whole deck needed rewriting, not even 48 hours before the debrief with the CEO, COO, see everything O. Really, really big deal. So we were there super late for the next 2 days, sorting it all out between us. And then on the morning before we went to the debrief, I was flicking through some stuff because my boss had asked me some questions, and I realized I had done it somewhere else. I had made the same mistake, and I was absolutely mortified. And naturally, I buried that and didn't tell anyone until probably right now. So if he's listening, then he's going to get a surprise. But it was quite a big lesson in terms of attention to detail, and that was quite an important element to that one.
And so how do you make sure you don't do that now? What is if you've just got this fear sat on your shoulder that makes you get your columns right, Chris? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, our media agency asked me to do a session with them talking about various parts of my career, not too dissimilar to this, and it was all very contrite, but one of the big things they asked me was what lesson sort of would I give to everybody else? And it's linked to that story really. And it's just about attention to detail is really important. I like to say sweat the small stuff and the big stuff will sweat itself, because if you don't and you present something sloppily or you make a sloppy mistake like I did then, and I'm sure I've done multiple times since, everything gets called into question. So if you walk into a session and it's all the little stuff like your fonts aren't the right color or the right size, or you haven't aligned the colors of all the different brands and your various different charts of various different series between your dashboard or whatever it is that you're showing to somebody, you haven't sorted out your footers so that they all look sensible and all of the notes are right, your spelling's wrong, your grammar's wrong, all those kind of basic things. But it really matters because it's all about perception. And I always find it really ironic that we work in an industry of communication and marketing, and we forget that how people perceive the things we show them and the initial stuff that goes in front of them is absolutely critical to how they're going to view the whole remainder of your hour or whatever. It's so important that your first perception is strong. So I just think it's absolutely critical that people sweat the small stuff and really do pay attention to it.
God, you'd be a terrible boss. So, okay, all right. So I hear you. And it's odd, isn't it, that you get the presentation, you plug the laptop in, and then you go full screen, you got this giant monitor on the wall, and you're like, oh no, I put that word in twice or whatever. So what I have seen in various places that I've worked, people are like, let's get the deck right, let's get the deck looking nice, but they haven't done the thinking. So I'm opposite of you. I'd rather it was a shit show, but the thinking was tangential, the thinking was creative, versus like someone who's made it all look nice. I'm like, why have you made this look nice? But your ideas aren't good enough, or this isn't dangerous enough or daring enough. So how do you balance those two things?
I think that's the difference between an analyst mindset and a creative mindset, to be honest. Listen, I think it's really important to have the story right. The story is absolutely critical, and maybe we'll speak to that a bit later. But particularly when you're trying to tell people stuff through data and through insight, having really clean charts, which are really visual and easy to understand. Oftentimes when you're an analyst, you think it's a really beautiful visual that you've made, but you show it to somebody who doesn't spend all their time in R, Python, Excel, whatever. And they're like, what is going on here? And being able to simplify it, absolutely. I'm totally on board with that. Being able to have the right insight and the right narrative. And for me, the thing about attention to detail is it's a habit. You form that all the time. You shouldn't really have to think about it that much. And actually, this is going to sound really lame, but in my broader team that we have internally at VMO2 and with our partners Ubiquity, who do a lot of our effectiveness work, our econometrics and auditing and so on, it's almost like a bit of a game of what you can find that somebody's missed, because we want it to be, we strive for perfection. And I totally understand it. Perfect shouldn't get in the way of good or done. But at the same time, if you build those habits and form those day in and day out, you naturally will correct those little things as you go along. Or you'll create templates and macros or whatever, write some code or whatever you want that will do it for you.
You just create a fascist culture of perfection.
Yeah.
Just destroy. But, we're just different people, Chris. But I love that. Genuinely, if you sweat the small stuff, you get everything right on a granular level, then the big stuff will sweat and take care of itself, which I assume is your advice. So we'll move on to your shiny new object, which is relationships in a world of data. Sounds like a book, doesn't it? What is that? Why is that your shiny new object? What is relationships in a world of data? Help us understand that, and then we can get into it.
Sure. So I thought really long and hard about this. I've had a few weeks to prepare, and I could have spent a long time talking about this sexy new model that we've got over here, or how well our reporting program is integrated with our experimentation program and our econometrics, and how all of those things link together with our digital attribution and our research. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours about the 4 years plus it's taken to get us to that point. But actually, the thing when I tend to talk to people in the industry that people remark upon is the fact that people tend to do what we say, or at least listen to what we say. And oftentimes when you find yourselves in those teams, and I've certainly had it a bunch of times in my experience, you can produce this fantastic work and clients will look at it and go, that's nice. and then do what they wanted to do anyway. And so that's why I wanted to kind of discuss this particular point or bring this to the table, because I think the reason it works for us and the reason we're able to really have that impact is because we have really strong relationships with the various teams that we work with around us. And that's something that my team and I have really consciously tried to drive and tried to build over the years, and tried to make a big effort to get people on board. Otherwise, marketing departments end up, and I know this is classic buzzword, but end up quite siloed. And I see that quite a lot with our own department in various different ways. But if you reach out to let's say your digital activation team or your website team, and they're coming to you and going, we've got this problem with conversion or whatever, various types of traffic coming in, we're not sure which keywords we should be using, which ones are incremental, blah, blah, blah. And you offer your method that you could look at that. That's really helpful to them. And they can come back with an answer. And then you start to work together on that kind of stuff. Equally, finance can come along and go, how do we figure out profitability of our various different marketing activities? Similar, get to work with them and figure that out on a channel level and support them on that. And, finally, the commercial department, which is the easiest one, pricing, promotional elasticities, response rates. Where should we put the next marginal pound of discount or vouchering or whatever? And we do so much work in that space. And I think in general, as an industry, we do so much work that could be better used outside of marketing specifically, or at least marketing in the way we define it. And that's why, like I said, relationships to me is just really important. And that's the way you get it out. Because, I used to live with a guy who was a salesperson. He was a recruiter. So as salesy as they come. And he always said to me, people buy from people. And ultimately, we're selling something, even internally, right? You're selling your marketing strategy, your vision, your creative strategy, to your point, and so on and so on. And if we don't sell that in the right way and speak to people in the right way and come to them where they are, even internally, which we know so much about doing externally, then we're sort of failing at the first hurdle.
This episode of the Shiny New Object podcast is brought to you in partnership with Madfest. Whether it's live in London or streamed online to the global marketing community, you can always expect a distinctive and daring blend of fast-paced content, startup innovation pitches, and unconventional entertainment from Madfest events. You'll find me causing trouble on stage, recording live versions of this podcast, and sharing a beer with the nicest and most influential people in marketing. Check it out at www.madfestlondon.com. Chris, this is like absolute music to my ears, right? Because when you say to someone at a party, not that I go to many parties, but let's just assume that I do, like, oh, I work in sales, and they're like, oh, really? Like, oh, God, like, I work in marketing. Like, oh, God. And there's this idea that sales is bad, right? Because the guy or girl on the street with the charity clipboard, that that cold lead gen, door knocking stuff, like sales, that's rightly has a bad name. However, what you're talking about is the reality that everything is sales to a degree, right?
Absolutely.
You're not. There's one thing sending a cold sales email is actually related to some way to you speaking to the website team about their conversion rate or whatever it is, So I love that you've taken on the idea that what you do is sell, even though what you deliver is insight. That's a different department. So how did you arrive at that, and how do you sell that to your team? Because I don't know, if you've got a junior arrives on your team, thinks they're going to work in analytics and marketing performance, you're like, you're a sales girl. Like, how does that work? So tell me about how you got there and how you make it work.
Yeah, so I think how I reached this point, or how we reached this point, and how we make it work are probably two slightly different things, but we got here slightly by accident, to be honest. Over time, we started doing a whole bunch of stuff and realizing that nobody was listening. And this has happened to me time and time again over my career. And if there are any sort of measurement specialists, and you've probably got people in this building who can relate to that quite heavily. And it's quite frustrating. And, if you have a team of analysts, right, I always say there's only two things you need to have a successful team of analysts, right? Variety and impact. If you provide those two things to a team of data scientists, analysts, econometricians, whatever you want, they'll generally be happy. So, variety and impact stands to repeat it. And we were doing all of these wonderful things. We were having all the variety of work, but we weren't really having much impact. At which point you start going, okay, well, how do we have more of an impact outside of marketing in particular? And you realize that your objectives are not the same as another team's objectives. They should be at a high level because you're all trying to drive profit, revenue, whatever, volume, but they aren't. Commercial are trying to drive a higher ARPU, average revenue per user. Marketing are trying to drive up a level funnel work or traffic. Your go-to-market team are just hoping that the product lands. But what it transpires is that they don't have the right data to be able to forecast that appropriately. But we do. So then you have the conversation with them and go, how do we help you with your business cases? That then helps the commercial team because they can get a better ARPU because they've got a better idea of what actually lands in the market. I think one of the big things that I've learned over the years is marketing measurement is really hard. That is really critical. It's so hard. And you have to pull in so much data from so many different sources. And you more or less have to be slightly finger in every pie to be able to say, yeah, we spent £1 million and it did something. And people are so reluctant to believe that. Unbelievably reluctant to believe that. In a startup environment, completely different story. But when you're in an established business that's been around for 10, 20, 30 years, people very quickly forget what it was like when nobody knew who you were. And so you have this treasure trove of stuff. We have so much data, Tom. You just couldn't believe it. I love it. I love spending time in it. You wouldn't believe our pricing data that we have across the mobile market. It is ridiculous. There's so much you can glean just from that. And it's really hard for people to condense it into something usable. And I find it so many times they get paralyzed by the volume of it. And if you can go in and help them and say, actually, we've done a load of work on this because we have to prove to finance and to prove to everyone else that marketing does something, period. Because apparently that's quite hard to believe. Here, have it. Can we help you? Can we build some tools that might support you? Can you give us some hypotheses that we can go and test within the marketing structure that might help, make your decision? I've got a great one at the moment with our stocking department who said, we don't know what the impact of putting 3 weeks till next delivery or 2 weeks till next delivery or 3 days or whatever it is on site as a message. We don't know what effect that has. Can you help us figure that out? Well, yeah, we can help you figure that out. Because we know how to do that kind of testing and we know how to work with that kind of data in terms of correlation analysis, regression modeling, and so on. And to link it back to the original point about relationship building and how you maintain that, it's those little projects that fall out of it. It's that way that you can engage people in your work and show, firstly, you do good work, which is the critical thing, which I probably should have started with, do good work first. But secondly, your work can help them. And therefore, they will want to help you in return, and they'll believe in general. They'll believe in the broader approach and the broader learnings that you're kind of putting out of it.
So, if you've got someone who isn't a people person, non-neurotypical type, likes working on their own, doesn't want to be in a brainstorm, doesn't want to speak to anyone, let alone anyone that they don't know very well, and that's fine. It's just a different type of person. How do you then get them to form relationships? Because you're an engaging, confident guy. So we're going to do this in person. We're going to go for a beer later. Brilliant. But I'm guessing you're atypical in my experience of people who work in your part of the industry. So how do you get someone who's like a closed book to come out of that shell and build a relationship when they're just not built like that?
I'm not going to lie, that is difficult. And I do, it definitely resonates that there are lots of people who don't find that easy. I didn't. I had to learn this process over time with the team. And ultimately, it's about one-to-one interactions and putting forward, well, the thing that I found works best is about putting forward solutions to those people in a positive environment. So if I come to you, Tom, and I say, you've got this massive problem with, traffic, it's not converting or whatever on particular parts of your site. I know that's not what you do, but as an example. And I say, as a guy on my team who has a fantastic solution to this, let's have a chat about it. You have the discussion. We're like, yeah, definitely there's something we can do here. He goes away, comes back with his solution. You can still be involved in that. You can still help them build the relationship. people with anxiety or who are particularly introvert, that might be challenging for them. But if they have somebody that they know and that they're comfortable with, like me or somebody else in your department who they're particularly keen on or comfortable with, I should say, then that tends to help move the conversation along. But it is difficult, and that's kind of why I think it's the shiny new thing, because we're so focused on the data and the model that we forget that there's people making decisions over here that you still need to engage with and convince. Actually, it's all well and good saying that Meta have this fantastic new algorithm that optimizes creatives and does all this wonderful stuff, but if you can't explain that in simple terms to somebody who's going to sign off your budget, who doesn't understand what the algorithm does, it doesn't go that far.
I'm in total agreement with you from writing this book that I'm writing at the minute about data and creativity and ads, that there's this idea that the abundant thing is the best thing. Right, so we can get our hands on a ton of meta information. We can pull in website data, whether, like as you say, there's tons of it. But just because it's easy to come by doesn't mean it's the most valuable. And sometimes there's data that you can't even capture that might be the biggest influence. Like, for example, you look at your website stops converting, but you may not be aware that your competitor's got some crazy deal on, for example. Actually, that's totally fine, or they've sent out a deal via email or something that you're not on.
Yeah.
And fundamentally, actually, the relationships are hard. The relationships do take time. The relationships do take empathy. But if you do invest in them, then all the data that you have becomes a lot more useful.
100%. And I think I've got one kind of story that I'd add to that, and also just kind of a broader narrative. I think where I started a few years ago with my team was, here's the answer. That was the way we would present things.
So easy to say.
Well, it is easy to say. And I think, you're laughing, and you're right to laugh, because that's one of the biggest lessons about it is people don't like, here's the answer. People like, here's what we think the answer is, and here's a way we could go and prove it, or go and try and test it. Why don't we go and figure that out together? That people like. And of course they do, because it's not combative, it's very engaging, it's collaborative. It makes people feel a lot safer than you're wrong, I'm right, which is basically what here's the answer implies. And that, again, just comes right back around to managing relationships and working with people. And I think your other point about data availability is just absolutely on the money. And I think Google in particular, we're very guilty of, as a broad industry, of relying very heavily on Google. Don't get me wrong, I love the data, but there's other stuff available that you can use that's very good. And, just a really simple example. One time I was working for a client who managed a zoo, of all things. And I was looking through these models. We run it over a few years, and I see this weird behavior where their seasonal peaks seem to vary year on year between half term in February, May, bank holiday, and Easter. And they seem to vary quite a lot. And basically what transpired was, as Easter moves year to year, the other holidays that sit around it get materially impacted by that. So if Easter's earlier, fewer people go in February half term and they wait and go in Easter. More people then go in May, bank holiday, and half term. Same in reverse. If Easter's later, then February gets a massive peak in volume. And I thought that was really obvious. And I was just looking at the sales data. I wasn't doing anything sexy there, just eyeballing it and going, this is weird. I go into the room with their CFO or whoever he was, see something, I present this insight thinking, they're going to tell me they already know this and this is nonsense. And they were like, that's brilliant. We've never thought about that. Literally all we've done is look at the sales data and gone, Easter moves every year. That's weird. And then, small change to the media delivery and everything, but actually had a really material impact just on how they forecast their admissions, because they hadn't really considered that Easter moving effect before. And that very simple insight doesn't require anything sexy out there. You can do a lot with not a lot.
Well, you can do a lot with not a lot. Not a lot is a lovely line to finish it on. I wish we could carry on, but unfortunately we have to cut it off there. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you about any of the things we talked about, where can they do that, and what makes a message that you will reply to?
Much like everyone on the 15 or so of these episodes I've listened to, LinkedIn is the easiest way. Just not generic, like take time to take 30 seconds to look at what I actually do. People see head of marketing performance and misread that as performance marketing, and I'm not a performance marketer, so that's usually the big mistake that people make.
Okay, very good. Get the job title right. Not a bad one. Brilliant, Chris. Thank you so much. Hi. Just before you go, I'd really appreciate it if you could take the time to write a review of the Shiny New Object podcast on Apple Podcasts or iTunes, whatever it's called these days, or whichever podcast provider you use. We're an indie podcast, so it would go a long way for us if you could just share the word and give us a bit of a support on those channels. That would just be fantastic. If you haven't got time, that's also cool. And yeah, if you could tell your colleagues about the podcast, and also, if possible, don't forget to subscribe. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you'd like to speak on the podcast or be a guest, or you think I'm asking the wrong questions, anything, I'd be super interested to hear what you think. So please email me at tom@automatedcreative.net. That's TOM at, I'm not going to bother spelling it. Anyway, you'll work it out. Thanks so much.